Good evening and welcome to the 2021 qualifications Zoom meeting with parents and students, where we're looking at the teacher assessed grades. If we could just start the meeting with a prayer, please. So if I can ask you to bless yourself in the name of the Father, the Son and the Holy Spirit, Amen. Dear Lord, please look after our community in these challenging times. Keep us safe and allow your Spirit to guide and support us. Give us the strength, resilience and courage to follow your example by the way that we live our lives. We ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. In the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. So can I obviously welcome everybody to this evening. We're aware that the evening itself, in terms of the teacher assessed grades, it's important that we communicate this information to our parents and our students. Initially, this meeting is being recorded and the recording for this meeting will be put on the website. Can I also highlight some details here with regard to if parents or students want to ask any questions, if you could send the questions in to Mrs. Lloyd, that is on p.lloyd@smchs.org.uk. And what we'll do is we'll produce a frequently asked questions document and we'll put this on our website as well. If you've got any concerns with regard to the remote learning, if you can contact Mr. Haste, and that's on d.haste@smchs.org.uk, and he will be able to respond to that. But to give context to the meeting, I'm going to introduce and give the context with regard to the teacher assessed grades. I'll then pass over to Mr. Rayner, who will discuss the support available. I'll then talk through the actual details of the process in terms of students and parental information with regard to the assessment process itself, and then Mr. Rayner will finish the meeting with regard to student well-being. So it's important to sort of consider the principles behind this process itself. We are really mindful that these are challenging times, and I'll talk about that in 1 minute. I'm also mindful that it's really important that we potentially over communicate at this point to provide that support for our community in terms of the teacher assessed grades. I'll talk about our approach, but I'll also give the rationale and the reason behind our approach to give justification to that. And again, it's important that our students in particular feel appropriately supported during this process. And again, we are very, very much aware at the moment of the students who are isolating. There is a significant number of students who are isolating at this present time, and we're absolutely mindful of this. We will continue to work and continue to support and provide work from subject staff. There's also additional support in terms of live support lessons that are going to be provided to students. If students are isolating during the times of assessment in a subject, the timing of these assessments will be rearranged. The intention of this is that this will be outside of the lesson time, so it doesn't interrupt with the learning processes associated with other subject areas, so that will occur outside of lesson time. If there are full bubble closures, we're going to look at a technical solution that will allow students to complete their assessments at home, but that is an absolute last resort. Before we do that, we will look at rearranging the actual assessment timetable itself. So to talk parents and students through the timeline of how we've come to this point and the key events that have occurred. Obviously before Christmas, so it's sort of in the sort of tail end of December into January, the infection rate increased vastly, and this was obviously linked to the new variant that had been identified. So on the 6th of January, Gavin Williamson, our Education Secretary, made a decision and announced to the nation that he was cancelling all 2021 exams in England. He then put in place a consultation process to gain information from teachers, from parents, from students, from anybody who was involved in the process. He posed a series, quite a large number of questions to gain information from the community. This received, I put 95,000 there, it was actually over 100,000 responses, over half of which were actually from students. This was a huge increase compared to the response on the consultation last year. And again, that reflects students and parents' concerns with regard to the process. On the 25th of February, they summarised the information from the consultation, and they gave schools sort of direct guidance in terms of the decisions to be made, which were related to the information from that process. And further guidance and information was being provided by examination boards up until the end of March and potentially beyond. And this is an important point to make, because the process and the information that I'm giving you now is based on the information that we currently have and currently have received. But there is a significant amount of information that we have not received at this point, in particular with regard to assessment material from examination boards, and that may lead to alteration in our plan. So that's a health warning, if you would. We've based all of this information, all of these decisions on the information that we have now, but we will ensure that students and parents are informed if we have to make any alterations, but hopefully not. So the principles at the foundation of the qualification process, again, the consultation led to guidelines, and these guidelines can be summarised by these principles. Some of them are reasonably self-explanatory. The qualification process must be completed with integrity, and that's by all parties, that's schools and students. The qualifications submitted must be as accurate as we can possibly make them. They've got to be evidence-based. The qualifications must represent sufficient coverage of the course, and this is different from last year, that schools have got to be able to justify that the assessment process covers a high percentage of the course, although they've not given the definition of what sufficient actually means in terms of a percentage. What they've defined sufficient as to mean, they've given the definition that it means that students should be able to successfully progress onto the next stage of education based on the assessments that they've completed. The teacher's judgment is the best way of evaluating the student's performance and to determine a grade. But also the teaching and the NEA or coursework must continue for as long as possible to allow course coverage and leave time for assessments. So we need to continue that teaching during this period of time to allow for that completion of as much of the course as possible, so that this means that the assessments will also cover sufficient amount of the course. Assessments themselves can only cover areas of the course that have been taught. And again, this is mindful of the situation caused by COVID and the isolations for students. And slightly differently this year in comparison to last year is that the vocational subjects are generally aligned with GCSEs and A-levels. There are some subtle differences, but in general, they are aligned to the GCSEs and A-levels. So again, with this in mind and with all these details that we're discussing, we always need to keep in mind that at the heart of this process are St Mary's students and St Mary's community. So we keep coming back to that, these are at the heart of every decision that we're making. And if I can just pass you over to Mr. Rayner.
Thank you. Good evening. This is just to help sort of identify what support there is to help the students perform as well as possible. And as it says there on the first bullet point, it is ultimately down to the students, the work they've been doing throughout their GCSEs, their A-levels and the vocational courses, and the work they carry on doing. They must prepare and revise as thoroughly as possible. And that's about using that Easter break wisely, about planning the time and investing that time so they can perform and show us what they're capable of doing. And to use the assessment plans they've been given, which shows them which areas of the specification they're being tested on. Go through that, use the specification or syllabus, as it used to be called, identify areas that are strengths, and more importantly, identify those areas that they struggle with, and then actually sort of work on those areas of weakness. Speak to teachers, ask for help with those as well. The subject teachers are putting lots of resources together, but giving them those out both in class, on paper and electronically through Show My Homework and email, to make sure that students are fully accessing all of that resources for them. There's pastoral support, which I'll come back to later. And again, it's just keeping on top of those resources. There's materials that we provide. There's GCSE Pod, which has got an excellent wide range of different resources on there. And there's other sources of information available to make sure students can keep working and keep performing at the best possible level.
Thank you, Mr. Rayner. So to go through a timeline in terms of what we are intending to do with regard to the assessments, you can see there you've got a 5-phase process. So the first phase is up until Easter, and subjects will continue to teach and complete the NEA, the coursework part of their course, and stop at an appropriate point. Revision will start during this period of time, and that support will occur through teachers. Also, during this period of time, the English language and the modern foreign language speaking assessments will occur at Key Stage 4. Phase 2 is over the Easter holidays, and students will continue to revise as hard as they can at this point. And teachers will prepare the assessments. They're preparing the assessments during this period of time because we are ensuring that the assessments themselves are linked as closely as possible to the examination board material that we are being provided with, but we're only getting provided with that at the end of March. During phase 3, and this is probably the most important aspect for the students themselves, that's where the vast majority of assessments will take place, and that's going to occur between the 12th of April and the 21st of May, which is a six-week period, and the assessments will be spread out. Phase 4 is the quality assurance process. So there's a number of layers in terms of ensuring that the quality assurance process regarding the assessments is absolutely as robust as possible. And with that in mind, there's an inset day on Wednesday, the 26th of May, to allow departments to meet and ensure that quality assurance is robust, that the communication occurs between staff to make sure that the grading themselves is as accurate as possible. And the final phase is internal within school. There's a final quality assurance process, and then we have to input the grades for the examination boards by Friday, the 18th of June. Also, an alteration which is different from normal years in terms of the examinations is when the results days are occurring in August. They've pulled the results day forward by approximately 2 weeks, so that the Key Stage 5 results day is on the 10th of August, and the Key Stage 4 results day is 2 days after that, on the 12th of August. And obviously that includes our sixth form signing on. The reason for this is to give students the time to appeal results if they feel that they've been unfairly awarded. And I've got a slide later on where I will talk parents and students through that. So hopefully parents and students have had a chance to have a look at the assessment handbooks that we've provided them. We've provided both electronic and hard copies of these for the students, but this document includes all subject areas. And again, it can look overwhelming when you look at it in totality, but students need to be aware that this covers all subjects that we offer, and it's important that you highlight the subjects that you yourself are doing and probably cross out the subjects that you're not doing. In terms of clarification of any of the information in the document, the first port of call is for students to speak to the subject teachers, and then if required, they can also talk to the subject leads or the heads of department. If the subject or your subject hasn't been highlighted, some of the vocational subjects don't have formal assessments and are based on coursework completion, and that's why they're not in that documentation. And again, at the end of the document, you've got a revision support template that I'll talk through in a minute. As I've mentioned above, it is really important that students work as hard as possible for these assessments, but also seek that appropriate support that Mr. Rayner mentioned with the teachers as they require it. So what I've done here is I've taken a cut of one of the pieces of information in the booklet, and it's linked to mathematics. And what you can see here is you've got an indication of when the week commencing for the assessment is. So you've got the week commencing the 12th of April, the 19th of April, and the 26th of April. There are further ones after that. And you've got an appropriate direction with regard to where the revision should be aimed at by students. So these are general topic titles, but it gives an idea in terms of what students should be looking at. So this should act as a support information for students to organise their revision. And again, you've got this intended timing for assessments. And staff themselves obviously are aware of this, and they will organise the teaching and learning experience for the students in relation to the revision that is on each topic area. Towards the back of the document, and it's really important during this time that students are as organised as possible, you're going to find a revision planning support pages, and I would advise students to complete these pages where they're identifying what the actual assessments are, what's occurring at what point, what the revision expectations are with each of the assessments. And again, there you've got a weekly checklist and weekly priorities that they can use to highlight and organise their revision appropriately. So the actual upcoming assessments themselves, in both Key Stage 4 and Key Stage 5, both the academic and vocational subjects, there are a series of assessments. The number of assessments in each subject area range between 3 and 6 assessments, and these will mainly occur after the Easter holidays and before the May half term. As I mentioned before, we have already planned the English language and the modern foreign language assessments before the Easter holidays, but there is approximately between 3 and 6 assessments per subject. The intention is to spread these assessments out to make the process manageable, to allow for the appropriate revision to occur, and to make sure that the students are able to manage the assessment process as much themselves to reduce stress for them. But the assessments themselves have been designed to ensure that there is sufficient coverage of the course as we have been directed by the guidelines themselves, and that the actual assessments themselves provide the appropriate rigour to ensure validity of the evidence that's produced for them. And again, as I mentioned before, for some of our vocational students, these assessments are linked to coursework completion, but you'll be directed by subject staff themselves. So the vast majority of the assessments are going to be created, and I'm talking in the future tense here, using the materials that will be provided by the examination boards. We don't have these materials at these points, but the majority of the assessments are going to be based on this. The assessments will range in length, but the average length of them is approximately 40 minutes, a little bit longer for our Key Stage 5 subjects. And students who do receive additional time and specific support in examinations will also receive that for each of the assessments that's already been planned and put in place. So the assessments again, in terms of the upcoming assessments, will only cover work that has been taught. And again, that is covering the aspect that we recognise that students have been isolated for periods of time. So the assessments will only cover this. And as I've mentioned a number of times, it has to cover sufficient amount of the course to be ensured that it is both rigorous and valid. During the actual assessment process themselves, the assessments will occur in classrooms, not in the sports hall, but they will be under controlled conditions. And I've not used the word examination conditions there for a reason, but it is similar expectations to the exams themselves. And to provide students the time to fully prepare for these assessments, they can't occur simultaneously, and this is an important point. It means that students will be able to access all of their lessons. If they occurred simultaneously, it would involve taking them out of different subject areas, which would then interfere with the revision process for them subjects, which we can't do. But to give students and parents reassurance, this approach has been confirmed, and we've sent this information into each of the examinations examination boards that we use, just for transparency in terms of the process itself. So with regard to grading decisions, for both the GCSE and A-level courses, the highest weighting of the grading decisions is going to be linked to the upcoming assessments themselves. And this is following the guidance that we've been given by Ofqual. And you can see in purple there a direct quote from the Ofqual document. Data is more valid the later on in the course that is collected. And that makes sense because it means that the teaching for the specification has occurred to a higher level later on in the course. The grades themselves are to reflect the standard at which the student is performing. So it's not a case of the standard that a student was performing, it's actually present tense again, it's where they are performing. So the upcoming assessments also provide sufficient course coverage and challenge to ensure the grading is accurate. But again, there is slight variations with the vocational courses, because that will also include information and evidence based on parts of the course that they've already completed, and that will be taken into account in the evidence process. So if we talk back to the appeals process, so again, the reason that they have moved the the results time is to allow for this appeals process. So if students feel that a result has been awarded unfairly or inaccurately, it's the students' and parents' job to provide the school with information behind the concerns. There'll be a template to fill in. The school will then send this statement and the evidence that they have used to calculate the grade to the examination board. And it's the examination board's responsibility to decide whether the grade should be upheld or needs to be adjusted. And the part in bold there at the bottom, it is important that everybody understands that this decision is in the hands of the examination board. It lies outside of the school because that information has been sent up to the examination board. So we're coming towards the end of the presentation. So if I can just pass you back to Mr. Arena with regard to student wellbeing.
Thank you. It is clear, we need to make it very clear to students and parents that this is going to be a difficult and challenging time. Any exam series is, I don't think this one's going to be any different. It's challenging. It is different in terms of the structure for this. We have got support in school that we've got some information on the screen there. We've got an emotional coaching program that's been used with students in form time, and there's been activities that have been completed this year in Curriculum for Life to help with coping strategies through this difficult time as well. And there's the normal support mechanisms that are always available in school. So there's the form teacher as a first point of contact, and there's Mrs. Hurst for Year 11s, and Miss Hewitt and Miss Seddon for sixth form students as well, to seek support with as well. But there's also a key role and support that you as parents can offer your children. And the key there is very much about routine. It is about, as I said before, about planning the time, planning the revision time, but also making sure that that routine involves sleep, that involves limiting screen time. Okay, the clear evidence that reducing screen time for an hour before bed improves the quality of sleep. And again, making sure that food is eaten and healthy food is eaten as well, as something which you can encourage with that as well. Exercise, it's not necessarily about hammering that exercise, but just having a break, getting outside, having fresh air, again, can help the brain recover. And then that investment means that you can perform better when you're revising as well. So that support that you can offer as parents is going to be invaluable for the students as well. So that brings towards the end of our presentation. I hope you found it useful. We do very much appreciate the support that you're offering your sons and daughters through attending this presentation. As Mr. Glennon said earlier, you may well have questions that are prompted by this. If you email the address that's on the screen there, we'll be able to respond to those and put together the answers for that document to answer any questions that you have. But otherwise, just like to thank you for your time this evening. Thank you.